Okay. Right, Shalom. First, I'd like to give all praises unto Yahweh Shem Yahushai and double honors unto the apostles and elders at Great Millstone. And honors to you brothers out there in the highways and the byways teaching this word in all sincerity and in truth. And shalom to you brothers out there that's listening and learning and supporting the ministry. And shalom to the sisters as well. And in this lesson, I'm going to go into some of Egypt's history. And I'm going to focus in on the age where the line of Ptolemies ruled in Egypt, and I'm going to show you that Cleopatra was indeed a so-called white woman. Okay, in fact, an Edomite. Okay, because you got a lot of these black consciousness people. They want to argue that because Cleopatra was an Egyptian pharaoh or whatever, that she had to be so-called black. But you got to understand that the original Egyptians were a people of color, but they lost the supremacy over their own land when they were conquered by the so-called Greeks, which the particular people that were calling themselves Greeks at that time, the higher up the power structure were actually Edomites out of Macedonia. And I'm basically going to show that and bring some information out of a book. Let me get the book up for you. The book is called the Leroux Encyclopedia of Ancient and Medieval History, because it's got some good information in there, and bring out some scriptures as well, of course, to back it up. All right, and I'll show you the book here. Let me make sure I got the book here. This is a very good book. If you could get it on the cheap, you know, you can afford it. It's got a lot of good information in there. It's a good resource to have. Okay, the Leroux Encyclopedia of Ancient and Medieval History. Okay. All right, so the first point I want to make is you had Edomites who migrated up into Macedonia and those regions and established themselves. How can we prove this? Well, when you go to a man in the scripture known as Haman, who is recorded in the book of Esther, we read here, I'm going to go straight, just bring it out. You can do your further research. Haman, also known as Haman the Agagite, or Haman the Evil, is the main antagonist in the book of Esther. Now, the book of Esther is set during the time of the Persian Empire. All right, it says, who, according to the Hebrew Bible, was vizier in the Persian Empire under King Ahasuerus, traditionally identified as Xerxes I. As his name indicates, Haman was a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, a people who were wiped out in certain areas by King Saul and David. So we see that the Amalekites were not completely wiped off the face of the planet, that certain of their descendants still existed even after the days of Saul and David. Now we have Haman. Now, when you go into the scriptures and you read about Haman, here in the additions to Esther 7 and 10, it gives you some extra information regarding Haman. Now, Haman, or Ammon, a Macedonian, the son of Amadatha, being indeed a stranger from the Persian blood, because the Persians were Elamites. Haman was not an Elamite, he was an Edomite. Okay, heralding from the region known as Macedonia. Now, where is Macedonia? Let's get that up, where Macedonia is. Macedonia. That's modern day. See if we can get it up. A resource that shows you where Okay. So here we have Macedon, and you can see here where it is. Macedon. You got Thrace up here. All right. Then you got Greece or Yawan down here. All right. Now let's get Edom, because he was an Edomite, right? Where was Edom? Why am I going on the maps? Crazy. Right. So we see that Edom, the kingdom of Edom, is situated to the south. Let me zoom in. To the south of the kingdom of Israel and Judah, down here near Saudi Arabia. All right. So if we go to a world map, just to give you an idea of the distance on what we're talking about, let's go to maps. I just want an image of the world. Okay, let's zoom out into the world. Right, okay. So if we have a look here, Edom would be this region here. Okay. This region, really, I think it's about here, somewhere here, around this region here. Macedonia would be in this region here. So understand that the scriptures is telling us you had an Edomite who was residing, who was hailing from Macedonia. But the homeland, their origin, their inheritance that the Lord gave them was over here. So when you hear people talking about how Edom was destroyed during the time of the Roman Jewish wars by the Romans, what they don't understand is, yeah, Edom was destroyed, but not all the Edomites were destroyed, because you had Edomites that were up in Macedonia, up in Rome, and these regions. The Edomites were not only in Edom, and they were no longer calling themselves Edomites. Many of them were calling themselves Macedonians, Romans, etc. They were calling themselves by the lands that they migrated to. So that cuts the whole notion that you got people out there teaching that, oh, well, the Romans destroyed Edom. Because it is, the Romans destroyed Edom. The Romans did destroy Edom. Which the Romans were Edomites. To the most part, they did destroy Edom, but they didn't destroy all of the Edomites. Because what about the Edomites that's even recorded that were the Romans destroy? Let's see if we could get that history. Oh, Romans destroyed Edom, Salakia. Trying to find the information. There is information going into it about how, because they try and bring it out about how the Romans destroyed the Edomites, but obviously it's getting filtered out through all this other information. That okay, so they were finally destroyed with the Jews in 70 AD by Roman General Titus. Okay, so history records that basically Edom was destroyed in 70 AD, but not the Edomites. Okay, because we read in here that Haman was a Macedonian and an Edomite. Now, when you jump down, this is going to be key. Haman, what he was trying to do, the whole reason why he got himself into that position, he got himself in the Persian kingdom, was he sought to establish the Macedonians, which were Edomites, as rulers over the world in the place of the Persians. He was a plant. He was a secret agent. It says, verse 14, for by these means he thought finding us destitute of friends to have translated the kingdom of the Persians to the Macedonians. But it wasn't time for the Edomites or the Macedonians to gain the kingdom, the world. That would come later through Alexander the Freak, who was an Edomite. So, Haman the Edomite, you with me so far? So when we read about Ptolemy now, let's go into the history. Let's fast forward in history during the time of Alexander. First Maccabees 1:1, and it happened after the Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian. Now, Philip was an Edomite. The Edomites was ruling in Macedonia, who came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. Edomite supremacy over Greece and therefore over the world, and made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth and went through the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up, and he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die, wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. And these were Edomites. Now, did Alexander have Israelites and certain other peoples underneath him? Yes, he did. But these servants that he had were Edomites. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule everyone in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them. Many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. Now, what I'm going to read about, I'm going to get some excerpts from this book. So this is the book the excerpts are coming from. Oh man, I wasn't even showing the maps. Yeah, just to recap, there's Macedonia and Edom is here. Okay, just a quick in case you didn't see. So Macedonia, this is how far Macedonia is from Edom. Okay, so you had Edomites living in Edom and you had Edomites living up in this region too. Alright, so let's jump back. I want to read some excerpts from this book. So this is page 149. It says, Macedonia at the ascension of Philip II. When in 359 BC Philip II came to the throne of Macedonia, his country was still barbarous in the eyes of the Greeks. Now, in the Greeks, you had Israelites, like the Spartans that were there, and you had Japhites, and you also had Israelites, okay? Hellenism had, however, already penetrated Macedonia. Her kings, at least, were themselves much affected by Greek culture and attracted Greek poets and artists to the Macedonian court. So the Macedonians incorporated Greek culture into themselves, but they ended up ruling over the whole of Greece. Edomite supremacy. Now, the point I really want to get to, I want to jump to the Hellenistic monarchies. Because we read about the 4 servants that established themselves as monarchies, and they separated themselves up into let's get see if we can get a map. They divided the kingdoms between each other. See if this is a good map. I can't get it. I want to get a good map to show you. Alright, so this is basic. This wasn't from the beginning, but you had the Ptolemaic kingdom, Antigonid kingdom, the Seleucid kingdom. You had Cassander as well. but he got ate up real quick. But basically, the kingdom was divided between his 4 generals. All right, here we go. That's a better one, okay? It was divided up between Cassander, Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Lysimachus, okay? So Ptolemy took Egypt, which is going to bring us to my point. All right, now I want to read from here. This says on page 163, under the struggles of Diadochi, it says, when Antigonus laid claim to the possessions of Eumenes, however, Seleucus made an alliance against him with Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus. In this way began a long struggle in which Antinogus attempted to restore Alexander's empire under his own leadership. Now let's jump down. I want to read this bit pertaining so it tells you about these different men, right? I want to jump across the page. Where were we? I want to jump across the page 165. Call them back. And it's under the section Ptolemaic Egypt, and this is going to be the point. All right, it says most of the let me get right, I'm gonna start from here. To the west, Cyrene maintained their independence but tended to gravitate into the Egyptian orbit. The power of the Ptolemies, however, was derived less from the territory they ruled than from their great riches. Following the example of the ancient pharaohs, all right, so when Ptolemy established himself in Egypt with the supremacy over Egypt, okay, Salakia. All right. Following the example of the ancient pharaohs, they considered themselves, got distracted there. Right, following the example of the ancient pharaohs, they considered themselves the sole proprietors of the entire country's wealth. So when Ptolemy took over Egypt, he incorporated into himself the same system of rule that the true Egyptians had before him, which goes back to the time of Joseph. Because when you read the book of Genesis, what was it, the 47th chapter, which I just went into in a previous video, you can read the Genesis 47 for yourself. I think you start from the 13th verse on down. You read about how through the famine, the Pharaoh basically bought the people and all their land. So the pharaohs from the time of Joseph onwards became the sole proprietors of the entire country's wealth. That is recorded. When that began is recorded in the Holy Scriptures, and that began during the time of Joseph. All right, and when the Ptolemies took over Egypt, they retained that structure of rulership, so to speak. It says, and they organized exploitation with a rigor unknown until their day. Most of the land was leased to native farmers at a rent which in normal times was supportable. In times of drought, however, such tenants were obliged to borrow from the royal treasury, fell into debt, and were unable to free themselves. And that sounds like America. That sounds like America, a system of debt. Now, the Israelite system wasn't a system of debt. It was a system of land ownership, and a system that included a year of release so the people wouldn't be oppressed through debt, sorry. In addition, forced labor was required for the upkeep of the dikes and roads and for the cultivation of poor lands which the state had not been able to lease. The remaining land of the kingdom was granted either to the personages of importance or to clerics, military colonists who furnished a regular and abundant supply of recruits for the armed forces. Industry was no longer independent, the more profitable industries had been turned into monopolies, while private workshops had only one supplier and one customer, the king. All right, and there's more information, but the point I wanted to bring out was the scriptures back up. When you go read Genesis 47 on down, it tells you how this system was incorporated into Egyptian culture, and then it tells you in this book how the Ptolemies, which you could read about that in the book of Maccabees. You go down, Maccabees 1 and 18, it says, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt, but Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded. So when you read through the whole book of Maccabees, it details about how Ptolemy was the king of Egypt, and you had the Ptolemaic line which was ruling in Egypt. Okay, this is all biblical history, and it's also found in secular history. Now the point I'm going to make is Cleopatra, I'm going to end on this point. Cleopatra was not a true Egyptian. She was not from the children of Mizraim, but she was actually an Edomite, because she had Macedonian and therefore Edomite ancestry. Now this is Cleopatra, the V11, the seventh Cleopatra. Okay, known to history simply as Cleopatra, was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Egypt, and she was a freak. She was freaking off. She was doing whatever it took, because at that time Egypt was basically a vassal to the Roman state, which the leadership of Rome, the power structure of Rome at that particular time were Edomites, and she basically had to freak off with them Edomites. You had Mark Antony and all them guys to try and get some kind of position for Egypt, because Egypt was basically turned into a vassal state, man, a breadbasket for Rome. They just grew grain. You know, the Lord done a number on Egypt, man. Whew. Okay, but they were nothing. You see here the lines of the Ptolemaic dynasty. We can get it up here, and it'll show you how a lineage goes back to Ptolemy of Macedon. Okay, and they would intermarry with other Macedonian dynasties like the Seleucids and so forth. So in actual fact, Cleopatra was really an Edomite. She wasn't a so-called black woman of Egyptian or Israelite heritage. All right, so if they put a so-called white woman in a movie and they to play Cleopatra, it actually would be historically accurate. Okay, and that's just a fact. At one time, the so-called white man did rule in Egypt during the time of the Ptolemies. All right, and again, all this history can go back to the scriptures. That's why you got to read the book of the Maccabees. That's why you got to read the Bible. It's accurate history. Okay, so let me just try and hit up, see what. Yep, Maccabees. Yeah, Salakia, I didn't know, but I brought the map out in the end. But hey, brothers can go and look up that information easily. All you got to do is type in Macedonia and type in Edom, and you see the difference. Salakia, I wasn't really paying attention, but you know, it come out. According to Jewish historians, the Roman Empire came to be identified with Esau in Edom. In medieval rabbinic writing, Edom is used to refer to the Byzantine Empire. According to Jewish historians, Romulus, the founder of Rome, was from the line of Esau. Yeah, he could have been. This info is on 12tribeshistory.com. Okay, right. So anyway, that's the point on that. You know, hopefully, you know, you go and do your own research, man. Look into the maps, look into the history, look into the Ptolemies, look into Alexander. And when you tie it all into the scriptures, again, you will find out that the Edomites were all up in Macedonia. They were all up in Greece. They gained supremacy, okay, and then they gained supremacy even in Egypt. And one of their scions, so to speak, was Cleopatra, okay, and she was a so-called white woman, an Edomite, okay. So, with that, I'm gonna say shalom.